everyone, and welcome to Grief at the Table. We are so grateful that you're all here with us, spending time together, and our intentions for really getting together tonight is to be in conversation about the role of grief guides and end-of-life workers, and to highlight the importance of this work. So we're so grateful and excited that you're here, and we're also very excited to share the launch of our new holiday publication. And Charlene, would you like to share a little bit about how we came together here through Pause?
Sure. So the six of us that are going to be speaking on the panel tonight, that's me, Charlene, there's Mangda, there's Tita, there's Brianna, Roshni, and Patricia, aka Patty, as we know her. So the six of us, we are half of the inaugural Pause Starlight Business Development Residency. Ooh, that's a mouthful, Elisa. But the founder of Pause, Elisa Fornere, is in the audience, and Pause was brought together to serve underserved populations when it comes to grief and end-of-life care. And this amazing process that we've been through in the last 6 months has been the Starlight Business Development Residency. So offering support for people of color in this grief and end-of-life space. And it's been so amazing for us to be in this community. When we talk about being an entrepreneur, that's a lonely journey. Grieving, that's a lonely journey. For most of us, as I imagine it is for most of you, if you're in this space, there's been personal loss that has brought you here. So you can imagine being an entrepreneur in the grief and end of life space is especially lonely. We are carving our own paths and we come at this from all these different angles. So for the last 6 months, we have been meeting monthly, we've had office hours, we've had people giving us information, making introductions, but most importantly, believing in what we do, believing in our personal and professional missions, and putting us in contact with each other. You see half of us here today speaking, and there are more of us in the audience. And I think it's really important that we have these conversations for the wider audience, but also amongst each other. So that's just a glimpse of what we've been doing. And Grief at the Table, which is the zine, the collaboration that we're also celebrating today, is a manifestation of what it looks like when people come together and when they collaborate. So hopefully this is just the first of many collaborations. Thank you for joining us here today. And we do encourage you to join the conversation. So do use the chat, please.
Yes, please use the chat, and we can just get started by introducing each of us as panelists, and we're going to share a little bit about our work, and we'll be in conversation, and towards the end we'll be answering some of your questions. So we can go ahead and get started. Charlene, maybe we can introduce you first.
Thanks, Mangda. I'm Charlene Lamb. I am a certified grief coach and the curator of the Grief Gallery. I'm originally from New York City, and I'm currently based in Lisbon in Portugal. We've had a lot of time zones during this residency, for sure. And thank you so much, West Coasters, for getting up so early. I feel like what I do is I help people who feel burdened by the stuff after a loved one dies. And by that, I mean the physical stuff and the emotional stuff. And I tap into the power of curating and creativity and art in order to do this. So happy to be here today. We're going to popcorn style, aren't we? Mangda, go ahead.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Mangda, and I'm the founder of Bossy. And Bossy is focused on loss and grief in order to renew our engagement to life. And the way in which that I've approached this throughout the last 2+ years now has been through community events. I've been working one-to-one. I do corporate offerings in terms of education or other supportive services. And I have some new products just to meet you in your grief, where I have a flower essence potion, and I'm really excited to share a new grief kit. So stay connected and I can share a little bit more about that. And I will popcorn this to Brianna.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Brianna Simmons. You can also call me Bree. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri, but now I live on Tamukwa land, otherwise known as Jacksonville, Florida. I am the owner and creative director of Unearthing Tradition. Unearthing Tradition is a holistic wellness organization that exists to create unapologetic healing spaces for Black folks to exhale, especially in the midst of sacred transitions. And so I work alongside individuals and families as they are navigating transitions at both the beginning of life as well as the end of life. I'm also working to support what I call the grayscale, that in between where we get to access better living, more dignified living. And so, yeah, I'm really grateful to be here. I'll pass to Patty.
Thank you, Bree. Yeah, so my name is Patty Montoya. I was raised in Colombia, Latin America. I am the founder of Titiposa. Titiposa was created after the death of my mom and my brother, and it really serves as the space where I can support others in the same kind of grief, especially anticipatory grief that I felt. I do this through energy healing, anticipatory grief coaching, or psychic medium, right? So the idea is to kind of release that kind of grief, that heaviness, or help you connect with those who have already passed. Yeah, you can find more about me at titiposa.com. I'll pass it to Roshni.
Thanks, Patty. Nice to see everyone. My name's Roshni. I'm the co-founder, and creative director of Marigold. And my co-founder, Rebecca, is here. Hey, Rebecca. And we are a nurse-founded grief wellness platform, and we support people one-on-one and through community groups and through creative expression for grief, and helping people connect to their body through their senses and to rituals to navigate and really find beauty through their grief and find that transformation to experience living, your truest life. And we are also a publisher. We're publishing cookbooks, a poetry zine, and we have a grief journal coming up soon. So we're very excited to offer tools and support for people navigating grief. And we're at Marigold, so check us out. And Tita.
Thanks, Roshni. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us tonight. I'm super excited to be here with you. I'm Tita Beatty, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm on the unceded lands of the coastal Miwok in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I am the co-founder of my company Meso, and just saw her a minute ago. Where did she go? Oh, there she is. Okay. My co-founder, So Yun, is here as well. So our company Meso is dedicated to serving immigrants and their caregivers, their grievers, and especially Asians in America population. And what we do is provide culturally attuned and affirming resources to immigrant communities, their families around care, death, loss, and grief. I came into this work after my parents had died in 2019, and as the second generation Asian American daughter to Thai immigrants, I was just so dumbfounded when I was just trying to find resources for my family, for my parents as they were dying, and then afterward for my own bereavement, and really looking for things through an immigrant lens, and found nothing at that point in time. And so Meso was created to address the needs of long distance, long-term caregivers, all through the aging, illness, end of life process, as well as into grieving. Our work focuses on like community education through webinars. We also facilitate grief support, peer grief support circles. And we are both end-of-life doulas. And our primary concerns, since we cover the arc of like long distance caregiving all the way through grief, is to try to meet particularly immigrant families where they are and to help them secure information to increase their capacity as well as receive support that they need through a culturally affirming lens. And if you're interested in learning more about us, we're at mesocommunity.com. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for your introductions, and thank you, Tita, as you're transitioning us into our discussion that we'd love to have with all of you, which is we want to dig a little deeper into why each of us are doing what we're doing. And I'm just gonna go ahead and start by being Patty. Would you like to begin the why?
Yeah, of course. So as I mentioned before, I lost my brother and my mom. I have also lost other family members very close to myself. And all of them died because of a terminal illness, right? So when I was being a caregiver to my family members, I found myself very alone in the process, especially as the daughter or the sister, right? I felt that we care a lot about the person who's passing away. We care a lot about the parents, or right, but kind of the sister or the siblings are kind of pushed back, right? They're seen as like, yeah, why are you not caring? Why are you not giving, right? When we're also grieving. And I also found out that there's a word for that that's called anticipatory grief. And I think that when I learned that, I saw how valuable it was to kind of raise, to call it that, awareness into this type of grief, and also this kind of different grief that we feel as kind of the sidelines. So my work really started from there, and then I've been kind of developing different tools to help myself, right? So I speak with my kind of ancestors, I do energy healing for myself, and then everything that I learned for myself, I like to kind of offer it to people, because I've seen how much it has helped me to kind of loosen up that grief and that the pain that I carry with me by releasing some energy, and also being able to still communicate with those who have passed away.
Thank you, Patty. And let's hear from Bree.
Yeah, I love answering the why question, because it gives me an opportunity to offer a new response every time, because there's so many reasons. I think what I want to highlight today is, first and foremost, my mom. I too lost my mom in 2011. She is and will always be my North Star. As my ancestor, I look to her for guidance just in the day-to-day of navigating life. And I think around the time that I lost her, up until this point, the death that we've witnessed in ways that feel very traumatic and violent, particularly Black death, that we've witnessed over the last decade or so. Yeah, it shifted everything for me. It shifted my worldview, and it made me realize that we needed to add nuance to the conversation, and care really needed to be put at the forefront, so that dignified transitions for Black folks could be accessed within this lifetime. And so that's why I do the work. I've been deeply inspired by, because I work at both ends of the spectrum, in birth spaces as well as in death spaces, I've been deeply inspired by Black midwifery, as those who practice Black midwifery typically practice at both ends of the spectrum as well. In that same kind of notion of activism, I am like inspired by the framework of reproductive justice and what that can mean for how we see community care, how we take care of each other, how we see each other as human beings, and how we help each other to transition from one phase or period of our lives to the next. And oftentimes, because we live in a system that is that where its foundation is white supremacy, that's not accessible to many. And so the work that I do really centers all of that and wanting to contribute to how we can transition. Thank you.
Thank you. And Roshni, I'd love to hear your why.
Yeah, thanks, Magda. As I shared in my introduction, I'm a nurse and my experience is mostly in palliative care nurse. So that's supporting people through end of life and really supporting people live meaningful, comfortable lives, even when time feels limited and short. And doing this work helped me really realize how much power and beauty there is um, in choosing life and choosing the truth and power of our grief, even when life seems, you know, just unbelievably hard. And for me, grief has that element of feeling, it can feel like a lot, it can feel overwhelming and heavy. But in my work and through my own personal journey, I've experienced there is so much wisdom and beauty in grief. And being able to access that is the hard part. But once we're there, there's just so much that comes to the surface. And I do this work because I want us to live lives that are, a reflection of our true desires, that have purpose, that, illuminate what is most important to us. So that is my why, is by connecting, to the wisdom of our ancestors, to the wisdom of our body, to centering pleasure. And yeah, that is why I'm doing grief work, so we can live in our power and our pleasure. I'll pass it on to Patty.
So we heard from Patty, but we'll move over to Tita, or Charlene, excuse me. We've heard Tita as well. Charlene?
Thanks. And it's so nice hearing everyone's whys and introductions again, because it's hard to believe that 6 months ago, when we got together into this residency, that we were like, who are these people? It's such a nice range of what we do and why we do it. So Roshni mentioned beauty, and I think beauty is a big part of why I do what I do. That there's so much inherent ugliness in life and in the world, including death and grief and all the indignities that go with it sometimes. So I do find it's really important to balance that out with beauty. And my mother died suddenly from a stroke in January of 2013. And I really instinctively leaned into my creativity and my instincts as a curator to guide myself through my grief. And when I decided to help other people with their grief, because gosh, that was a lonely, lonely time and really difficult, not just emotionally, but really logistically and practically. When I decided to help people, I wanted to tap into that creativity and the curating. So it's a very common problem to not know how to choose what to keep after a loved one dies. And my uncommon solution is to curate, sometimes literally curating an exhibition about the person and putting the spotlight on the belongings that they've lost. So I think it's really important to acknowledge the people that we had, the relationships that we had, and to be able to recognize and honor them in our particular ways. And I think curating is a beautiful way to do that.
And before I speak, Tita, would you like to add anything else to your why?
No, I'm good for now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you everyone for your whys, and to share a little bit about my why, it's very similar. Being so intimate to the end of life, being so intimate to grief. I helped my mother pass at a home setting, and it was very challenging. I went through all of these various end of life industries. I was alone at home with my mother without any support. So I was really just thrown into that situation, tending to her body, planning for a funeral, dealing with all of the household tasks that come with death. And because that was so challenging, with some time, I had heard about death doulas and death doula work. And one of my friends mentioned that's what I was doing as I was caring for my mother. And shout out to Going with Grace. I ended up doing the doula training with them, and everything clicked for me in terms of really wanting to create and provide what I did not have. And I'm just so driven to really reimagine the way in which that our Western world um, views death, understands death, experiences grief. I'm really passionate about integrating the end of life into our modern day where it's not a surprise, where it is more supportive, and we can access those beautiful touchstone points, as a few of our members had mentioned, of the beauty and the other side of it, all the parts of it. So that's a bit about my why. And we would love to talk a little bit more about our role in the world today as grief workers, death workers, end of life workers. We're curious about, from each of you, why you feel that this is so important, and perhaps the ways in which that we are in the end of life space currently. So we can just go back around, and perhaps we could start with Tita.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, the focus of my work is on immigrant communities. And I just want to share a little bit about, I want to share an experience that might help to highlight this. My parents were from Thailand. And my father, he was actually a physician. And my mom, like when they came here to America, they both spoke English at a very high level. And when I was born, my parents, this is what they told me, that basically like they shared their language with me, and I didn't speak English by the time that I had to enter American school. And so my parents had shared that I came back for my first day of kindergarten, and I was so mad because I didn't know what was going on. And so after that point, I was just like, no more English. And they, wanting me to like help assimilate and whatnot, they never spoke Thai to me again, really, in terms of like helping me to learn. Flash forward to when my dad was dying in I would say an indifferent hospice. And even though, he'd spent more than 50 years in this country and primarily speaking English, by that point in time, that portion of his brain had actually closed off. And so he actually reverted to his mother tongue. So here he was in a hospice, 7 days, I think, about like away from dying, and he couldn't communicate really with anyone. And I was the one who was primarily visiting him, and I'd given away my language. And so to be in a moment like that, where, my father, he was basically like in a helpless position, and I was in a similarly helpless position, although, fully physically capable, but in a helpless position in terms of not being able to access each other in that way anymore. And at least in terms of when I think about our work with immigrants, and that's not necessarily an experience that all immigrant families have at the end of life, not necessarily, but it is a possibility. And in terms of understanding a little bit more about perhaps education and information, to help either set or manage expectations, through the end of life process and what might lay ahead. Then it's around aspects of that, around being able to bring, important aspects of culture into what it looks like to make all of these kinds of difficult transitions that I find to be really, really important. And that's part of the gap that we would like to try to close.
Thank you so much for that, Tita. Roshni, would you like to share?
Sorry, Magda, I missed the first part of the question.
Yeah, no worries. We're just sharing a little bit about why we believe these roles are important. And perhaps if you'd like to share a little bit about how we can fill in the gaps in the current end of life spaces.
Yeah, thank you. For me, coming from a clinical hospital background, I think it was jarring for me to see how often grief is seen, there's so much stigma around grief, even though we strive to be, really empathetic in our offering our care and even in the system, the way the system is structured, the healthcare system. We're trying to like meet the needs of people, but I felt it really fell short of tending to grief. There's bereavement support that again is very limited and not always accessible, like the way people here on this panel are offering, that's culturally resonant, that tends to the differing aspects of how grief shows up for people, not just individually, but on a community level as well. So with what we're doing is to shift the conversation from grief being a problem, that needs to be sort of like solved, but how do we live with grief? How do we tend to it? How do we, get curious about it and ask questions around it? And really including it in our day-to-day living. I think that is something we want people to experience and not shy away. And again, label it as, that's a disorder or or something to be, experienced on the margins. So we're inviting people to embrace grief and to, be nourished by the act of grieving and to destigmatize, grief as this, dark, lonely thing that one must do, far away from society and culture.
Thank you. And let's hear from Brianna.
Thank you for your responses. It's got my mind like in a million different places, but I'm gonna try and focus. I think that something that I would add to the conversation from my perspective is that I think stereotypically, Black folks are seen as able to withstand all the hard things in life, stereotypically seen as being superhuman and strong, and something that I would like to contribute to the end of life space, and why I think that this work is important for people of color to be holding leadership roles in, is so that we can literally put those burdens down. We can be seen as human. We can emote in ways that are far, far appropriate for the hardships that we've had to navigate. And yeah, to literally just be able to exhale and do so in a way that feels loving with one another. Another gap that I see in this realm is that, there's just general distrust of medical systems and medical services from many communities. And having someone who is reflective of you in that experience, um, just as a person, without the extra, knowledge or expertise or what have you, but just as a person, I think speaks volumes to just what's possible on the other side of that. And yeah, that's what motivates me to do this work and why I think it's really important.
Thank you. And let's hear from Trisha.
Yes, thank you so much for these stories. For me personally, I think I grew up with the Catholic faith, and I was raised with this idea that when we die, we go to heaven. But when my brother was passing away or, dying, I was constantly asking myself, but like if heaven is such a great space to be, why are we so sad to see them leave, right? And I think that that's something that I've been working around a lot. And I start with that phrase because I feel like no matter what your belief is, your religion, your spirituality, your path, I think that there's so many questions that we don't have the answer. And this kind of systems that we have in place, right? Like you go to a therapist, you go to a doctor. Like I feel like when my brother was dying, when my grandmother, when my mom were passing away, we had such a great support system, as Roshni mentioned, like palliative care. And I think that they all helped us in a way that they all gave us kind of their perspectives, right? Like when you pass away, we can feel them. Like they kind of gave me like a sense, a feeling of what is going on in the other kind of in that other space, right? I'm a big believer that when we pass away, there's kind of a different life out there and it's a better world. So it gave me a lot of peace and comfort to know that they were okay, they were safe, they were still with us, they could still hear us. And that support meant the world for me. Later on, during COVID, I became, I worked at a senior home and, people were passing away and it was COVID and there was no support, right, from family members. Family members couldn't come in. And being able to be there for people that didn't have a family member or loved one, to be there with them was really impactful because I grew up in Colombia and all my deaths happened in Colombia and we're very close, like huge families, huge group, huge collaborators. And to go for dying by yourself. So I think that there's so many ways that we can be there with those who are passing away. I always talk about things that we should have asked someone before they passed away. How do we bring those things up? I think that sometimes the doctors and the specialists that we've kind of trained in this very, I don't know, wide world, in my view, lack that kind of tradition, that cultural heritage that I think adds to how we should die. So I think that what I try to do, and I think what we've seen with this variety of different options in kind of the death care, is that provide that service, that system, that conversation that makes death a little bit more dignified. So I really hope I can kind of be there in different ways that the system hasn't been able to kind of provide us with in the past.
Thank you. And let's hear from you, Charlene.
Yeah, I think what people often encounter is, am I doing it right? I don't know where to start. That's what I hear a lot. And I think that was certainly the case for me when I had to clear out my mother's house. And I hear it now from clients who have maybe had a storage unit for 5 years, 10 years. I don't know where to start. And I think there's an aspect of the way that we talk about grief and the process and the wider understanding of it. There's so much questioning of, what if I do it wrong? I'm not grieving enough. Does that mean I'm doing it wrong? Maybe I'm grieving too much. Maybe I'm doing that wrong. So I think there's a wider desire for me to make information about grief and end of life, yes, though my area, those specialties more grief, to be more accessible, to be more approachable. And for me, the way to do that is art and creativity. That I really do feel like I have a framework called curating grief. And I think there's an aspect of curating, which I, by the way, just define as choosing intentionally, that can be very powerful. That when we lose people in our lives, whether it's sudden, like in my case, or whether it's expected, there's illness there, that there's so much that's out of our control, right? We're just kind of hit by circumstances outside of our control. So by curating, we can recognize some of the choices that we do have. And I think making those choices visible is really important to me. And I'm just so in love with objects and belongings. I was, as a curator, even before my mother died, but afterwards, the belongings and the objects, I think, can be so helpful as a source of awareness and connection and healing. So even like for connection, for instance, that I think when we choose what we keep, we're shaping the relationship that we have ongoing with our loved one who has died. So offering people that option to look at the items and to be able to choose what they keep with intention, with that idea that, one, they are choosing how they want to continue to be connected to their person. And also, it seems kind of simple, but having the belonging of a loved one on a shelf, having an object that reminds you of them, that is, to me, such a helpful way of staying connected, of having that person's memory in your life still. So to me, it's a very practical approach, because some of us are not good at getting rid of things, like me, and I need a creative grief. And it's also just a really, I think, a beautiful emotional process to be able to look at our relationships with the people we've lost and to be able to make choices about how we want to continue to relate to them. And I think there should be more accessible ways to do that. So.
Thank you, Charlene. And to share a little bit from my perspective, because my experience was so challenging and I was navigating the various end of life industries, it all felt very fragmented for me. There wasn't this holistic picture. There wasn't anyone guiding me. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know who these various people were throughout each stage of my mother's death. And for me, I would love to have someone that is willing to help guide me, to help inform me, educate me. I probably would have made so many other choices with my mother's death. I would have been so much more prepared. I would have known a little bit more of what to expect, and learning that there are individuals like us here and so many others that are willing and compassionately wanting to help is such a gift. And I really want to shout out everyone that is in these end of life spaces. It's not usually the most desired space to be. So I think it says a lot about folks that are choosing to be here or finding themselves being here. And I couldn't be more grateful, just knowing everyone that is here and the work that you do. And yeah, I think that additionally, there's so many different ways to grieve. There's so many different expressions of living a life. And I think having that diversity and cultural competence and relatability, whether it's experiential or learned, is really important. And so that's why it's really exciting to see what Pause has created, I think, with all of these different expressions and knowing that there's people out there that want to help. So we have a few more questions that we'd like to address before we open it up to questions from all of you. And I really want to kind of hear from each of you as well about where do you meet people in their grief or loss? Or when do you find people working with you most often? So we're going to just go back around. And if you need a moment or pass to think about it, that's fine too. But let's start with Trisha.
I need a minute.
In terms of when you're meeting people in their grief.
Yeah, I'll pass.
Okay, sounds good.
It's a surprise question.
Yes, yes.
I don't mind answering first.
Okay, go
Some
ahead.
time to think about it.
Mhm.
But like I wanted to kind of bring that question to us as a panel because we do provide these services from different angles. And also there is a difference between really grief support and end of life care in terms of when people need us. And depending on who's joining us and where they are and how they're joining us, some of us might be familiar with what a death doula does, what a grief coach might do, but not everyone does. So in my work as a grief coach and as a curator, I would say generally people who come for coaching are stuck in some way. And often I'll ask, where are you with this stuff? And by that, I mean physical and emotional, though mostly people tend to think about the physical, but of course the physical represents a lot of things. So some people are in the midst of having to clear out a house, an apartment, a lifetime of belongings, and they need that emotional support. I am not a personal organizer, but I will talk you through how to use that lens of curating to make a terrible task more doable and give you emotional support for that. Some people might be stuck, like I said, in that they've had a storage unit for a decade and they're ready, or at least they want to be ready to tackle it. It's costing them money, it's costing them space, it's costing them mental and emotional space. And more recently, there have been people who want to sort through their own things, to ask, if I was to do an exhibition about myself, what would I want to have on display? And that might be someone who has a terminal diagnosis or is facing some situations where they really want to do that curating on their own. So I work with people when they feel stuck and are ready to get unstuck. Magda, I'm going to call on you. Give other people more time.
I have worked with people in their range in terms of when folks have a parent that is just recently diagnosed after a loss has occurred, but most frequently it's usually after a loss has occurred when we're meeting in their grief. And where I love to meet people is really, whether you've already experienced loss or grief or you are curious about it, I really love creating experiences such as death meditations and whatnot to get us as intimate and familiar with these topics and find ways to integrate the end of life more into our day to day. But in terms of grief work, typically a loss has already occurred, or they're anticipating one, and passionately it's giving death meditations and having these conversations and providing practices and tools and reflections to reduce the anxiety, reduce the fears, so you can better show up for your loved ones, better show up for yourself, for this eventual experience that we'll all have. So I'll share, I will go to Tita, if you'd like to share. Do you meet
Yeah.
people?
Thank you, Magda. And thank you for this question. There's a range where we meet people, and part of that is because Soyeon, my co-founder, like between Soyeon and myself, we represent, I would say, like the two different ends, I guess, kind of like of a process. And so between the two of us, we have met people who very well may be in either trying to figure out what caregiving is going to look like for their family, or what are some of the challenges and perhaps aspects of relief for long distance caregiving, as well as touching on anticipatory grief, as Soyeon likes to say, as a caregiver. And so we've met people at that end of things. And then for me, because I've lost my parents, like I would say that like I'm really focused, I guess, more like on bereavement. So we also, again, facilitate like peer grief support circles. And the one that I needed, actually, that I didn't find, we launched it in August of last year. It's called Grief, the Loss of Your Immigrant Parent. And it's very, very specific. And what we found in there is people come and they have lost like an immigrant parent at least. And we talk about that, but what's also come up that's just really fascinating is this notion of cultural bereavement. And so that's also something that very much makes it into our grief spaces, where people, at least let's say from my perspective, cultural bereavement is represented by the fact that my parents are gone, and they were my tie to Thailand. They were my in terms of language. If there was one of the gifts I would say that they passed along to me is like, I love Thai food, but that's really like my gateway into it. And they were all the rest. And so in terms of this notion of cultural bereavement, and loss of, aspects of that through the loss of, whomever it may be within like an immigrant family, that is one element that also comes up, which is really fascinating because it looks like so many different things, just depending on like where a family may be from, or why they immigrated, where they immigrated to, things like that. So for us, there's a number of touch points along the whole entire, I guess, like arc, that leads into dying and death, as well as afterward, that we've been able to see and meet people at different components of that.
And I just want to let everyone know a little bit of a side note that Patricia had to leave. She's not feeling well, so please do look out for her work and her information. And Roshni, would you like to share a little bit about where you're meeting folks?
Yeah. So we're working with folks who, who are bringing a sense of curiosity to grief. And our lens is really working grief through a sensory perspective. We really believe that grief is a full body experience. And again, culturally, the way grief care has existed is it's, usually offered as, 5, 6, 7 limited session experience where you talk about it. And the focus is really to sort of move on from it. The way we're approaching it is how can you navigate and find little pearls of wisdom, or even start getting curious about, like, what is your grief asking, what is it needing. So that looks like, storytelling is a big aspect of that work. It's writing your story, especially as folks of color. There's very few books that talk about our grieving experience, like, the way Tita and Charlene, Magda, Brianna, Patty, all of us, we have such incredibly unique stories, but it's really hard to see our experiences reflected in the broader culture. So, that looks like running our grief groups where we're encouraging and we're supporting people to even start thinking about, like, what is your grief story, what is it asking, what is it needing from your physical body, from your emotional body, from your spiritual body. How does your grief want you to show up in the world? Maybe it's resting more, maybe it's having a mission or a cause, maybe there's confusion, maybe it's like creating a specific work of art. So it's really getting curious with what is your grief asking for and offering that. And we really believe, our ancestors and our cultures have always offered a blueprint for navigating grief. And that's really through our cultural traditions, our ways of connecting, building community. That's how we eat food, the foods we eat, how we cook, the holidays we celebrate, the textiles, how we adorn ourselves, how we decorate our home. Things we may take for granted, but they're not. They really are the tools and the building blocks of how you move through grief and how you integrate that into, as rituals of reflection, of celebration. And it becomes this, a continuous link where we're remembering, celebrating, and reclaiming these traditions. So it's been really just very exciting, to use that word. It is exciting to meet, like, we're for building a community, finding the people. I just feel there's such hunger for spaces like this, for people to collaborate with, for people to find, such unique ways and resources. So yeah, I mean, I wake up when I do this work and I feel excited about, oh, like, what are other creative ways in which we can reach people. So yeah, that's been just wonderful to dream of that, process for me.
Thank you. And we also would love to hear from everyone if there's a change that you'd like to see in the grief and end of life industries, if you'd like to name a vision of yourself. So perhaps we could start with Tita.
Yeah, wait, did Bree get to answer?
I did not
Brianna?
had it.
What's that?
I didn't answer the last one.
Oh, so sorry. Thank you for catching that, Tita. Let's hear from you, please, Brianna.
Yeah, it's okay. So up until this point, most of my work has been on the birth spectrum. Aside from my personal experiences and also training with Going with Grace, I have supported clients who are navigating abortion care, whether it be the logistical aspects of that or the emotional and spiritual process of that loss. I've also supported folks who are experiencing pregnancy after loss and what that looks like, the grief that that can hold. And so up until this point, that's where most of my work has happened. I am seeking to have various entry points with folks at the end of life spectrum. And right now I'm working as a hospice volunteer. So just supporting individuals and their families as they're navigating end of life. I'm really interested in the end of life planning as a really profound opportunity to for living folks to be informed and empowered to make end of life decisions. And then similar to what you said, Roshni, it was beautifully said about really just reclaiming and remembering the traditions that have carried our communities, our ancestors through some really tumultuous times. I'm also curious of doing that. That's literally what unearthing tradition means. And so within that space, I'm wanting to curate community gatherings for folks to process experiences of grief, whether it's individual or collective, by utilizing ritual and ceremony, by incorporating intuitive movement, and other divine and like cultural aspects of how we process things. And so, yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Tita.
Go ahead, Tita, I see you.
Can I just jump in, kind of like going on this like same whole line? One of the things that I found, and I mean, I kind of highlighted this like earlier, but I just want to speak to it a little bit more, is that like, for example, in terms of my own experience, like with my bereavement, I sought out like resources. I mean, I tried to read everything. I went to like tons of grief support groups. I got therapy. I went to bereavement counseling, like all of it. And I got to a point with it where it's like, I just came to realize like, this is not working for me. And when I tried to step back and tried to understand what is going on here, like what came to me was just, it was this notion of like, I am the only Asian in the room. I am the only person of color, like in this space. And like, you know, if I wanted to talk about perhaps like having this like profound disconnection from my parents just in terms of like language, or again, like that cultural bereavement, like I talked about, like there was just like, you know, just like there was like no, I remember the way it felt. It was almost as though there was like no compassion in the room. I know that there was absolutely no understanding in the room. I know that. But, you know, kind of even taking a step back from that, the way it felt was like that there wasn't even compassion in the room. And, you know, I felt at a time when it was just like so vulnerable, like to just feel like I was like, again, just kind of like shut out, you know, like almost as though, well, this space is not for you. And I just thought to myself, how is this even happening? Like, this is like the most vulnerable period of time in my life. And like, this space is not for me. I can't actually come here and like show up with my full self. That's like, what is that? And I think that that's not an uncommon experience for people of color in grief. And you know, and backing it up, I mean, not just in grief, in end of life. And I mean, come on, like, you know, like there's just aspects of that like throughout life. We all, I mean, we know about the systems, you know, and when it comes though to the notion of our communities leaving this world, it's like, no, not being able to leave this world with dignity and care and respect and love and safety and warmth, that is not negotiable. It's just not. And so that's why we're all here, because we're all providing a different option, a different option with care, with love, with respect. And that's really what it's all about. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And maybe that also answers that question. What was that other question? Okay. Anyway.
Yes, the changes we'd like to see in these end of life industries. Thank you, Tita. And let's just open this up for all of us. If anyone else would like to chime in, I'd love to just welcome you to unmute yourself. And we have a lot of folks filling that, Tita, so thank you.
I love it. Getting us fired up, cheering in the chat. Yeah. What I love about this residency too is like I said, we come from different angles and we also have like different energies where we're coming at it. So it's like a really awesome mix. We also like do fire each other up. I think, yeah, there's an aspect of it being wanting more voices. I mean, one of the interesting takeaways that I had coming into this residency was I knew that our experiences would be different as people of color. I hadn't necessarily appreciated how different all our individual experiences were, that people of color are not a monolith. Asians are not a monolith. My experience is not the same as other Chinese Americans. And I've really appreciated the conversations that we've had because it's even opened my eyes more to the necessity of having the space for having the awareness of individual experiences and all the factors that come in, right? Even like, did we come to the US as a child? Did we come as a teenager? Did we grow up here? Did we come like later, like in our adulthood? That all impacts our experiences, whether we grew up in a traditional environment or not. I really didn't know very much about Chinese culture because my parents really wanted to assimilate, I think, as a way to get along, right? That's how you find success as a Chinese American. That's definitely a narrative that was in our family. So I really don't know anything about what my ancestors did or what the rituals are. And I so appreciate, what Bree talks about, what Roshni talks about in terms of like looking back at what our ancestors did, because it's opened up curiosity for me. So I would like to see more spaces that are open to all the range of experiences and curiosity and not knowing on many levels, but wanting to know and being open to knowing. So yeah, more room for those nuances. And I think part of that is having spaces where we talk about grief and loss that is not in therapy, right? Talking about grief and loss is a normal thing. It doesn't have to be pathologized. You don't need to get like a prescription for it. And I think we all gain so much when we have these conversations with each other.
I'll go. Charlene, you just said exactly what was in my head. So that was beautiful, like word by word. You just read my mind and went for it. I think what I would like to see more of again is this reframing of grief being, sort of this pathology and this oscillation, right, of like from anger to chaos to, I think for a lot of us, yes, that's an element of it, but most of us, like that's not where we want to be, or that's where we are most of the time in our grief. Like there is a lot of way in which we build community. We're like being here in pause, like this beautiful residency, the zine coming to fruition is because of our collective grief. This is how we have channeled our grief. So for me, I would like to see more avenues and amplification of our creative efforts of how we want to, be with our grief. And, we'll share more about the zine, but you'll see, there's just such incredible, beautiful stories. There's, recipes. I want people to experience and their sort of like even their imagination to be broadened on what grief care looks like. The way it is now is very, very narrow. It has, this really lens of, honestly, like it is very uninviting place to be for a lot of people, even for me. And I do this work all the time. Like when I imagine grief, I'm thinking, a beautiful garden, with like a cafe table, books, incense, maybe there's like, you know, Tita's like families, like noodle soups. And I can just imagine like, Bree bringing something from her tradition, Mangda, leading a meditation, and Charlene curating this altar for us. There's like, and, Patty like offering her, energy readings. There's ways in which it all fits together, and it's such a beautiful creation to me. And I want to see that come to life, be it like a movie, like a Netflix show, a book, a beautiful, coffee table art book, an anthology, a storytelling series, and like all of you folks, come experience this with us. I think that's what I want to see, away from this idea of like, this terrible trauma happened to me and I went on a hero's journey and I, overcame my grief. To me, that is not our story. And I don't think we should strive to, achieve that narrative or follow that narrative. So I would love to see, millions of grief stories come to life, because each of our stories is individual and very unique to us. Thank you.
I love it. And I so relate to a lot of what's been shared too, in terms of really going back to, ancestral lines, bloodlines, cultural lines of all backgrounds. All of us have these beautiful, rich practices. Historically, we've been dying all throughout time. And that's definitely an access point that I reach through my work, as well as going through my own Lao culture. What are the ceremonies that we do? What are the rituals? And one of my favorite sayings, I don't know who said this, but it's something along the lines of, grief is too heavy for one person to hold. And the idea of really making grief more of a collective understanding, experience, support is a huge value of mine. I can relate to Tita. After I lost my mother, I was just in a fog, and there was nothing that felt really held and relatable. And I think that's what's so beautiful about this emergence of that world, is there's so many of us and others that are really trying to create those spaces and those access points and those the support that comes with it. And I'm huge on interconnection, right? So it's like, even if one person's in their grief, we're still impacting our loved ones. So again, really going back to that communal collective experience and reframing this hyper individualistic culture that we have, and reframing capitalism. Like, we don't value grieving. We need to be productive, like there's so many points in which that I think a lot of us here are really trying to create those changes that we are all aware of and that we see. And I think it's quite an exciting time for that. So I also want to say too, with having that support and valuing these different perspectives and valuing these different ways and valuing beyond just one-to-one talking, which I have had and I found valuable, but going beyond those methods to really help us. Like, life is hard right now. So we would love to open this up to all of you in this space. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Please use the chat. Yeah, so if anyone else would like to ask us anything, the space is yours. Hi, Gail. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, hello and thank you all. I'm sorry that I was late. I am expressing much gratitude for this gathering today. I come to you from the land of the Dena'ina people in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm a drum circle facilitator as well as a sound artist practitioner. So I do sound immersions with the gongs. That's what I specialize in. And with doing this work, there's a lot that comes up for folks. And I have always wanted to have a space where I can bring BIPOCs together for their grief, because it's not the same. We have a rich culture, heritage of so much, and that heritage and culture leads to healing in a way that the dominant culture, they can't tap into. And currently I am taking a grief course and I'm learning a lot from there, but what I'm learning here resonates so much more for me. And thank you, I have gotten ideas on ways to bring our communities together in a way that we can support one another, in which they have a voice in their healing and celebration of life. Much gratitude. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Gail, and thank you for being here. Anyone have any questions for any of us here tonight? Priscilla, feel free to unmute yourself. Hi.
Hey, don't laugh. I'm in LA, but I don't have heat. I was just wondering, I mean, thank you all for your perspectives. It definitely is like a way that I have not heard grief talked about. So that's pretty cool. And especially like, I don't know, the different types of ways that it's embodied and or like sensed. But I was wondering, you know, for all of you as practitioners, like how do you hold, like what are some of the tools in your own kit when holding your own grief?
I can start. Thank you for being here and for offering your question. Yeah, I mean, this work is deeply personal, as we've all mentioned in one way or another. And so, yeah, to go toward our own grief is just necessary. For me, the process of participating and contributing in this zine was medicinal. It gave me a space to express my grief, especially in this season where the source of much of my grief has happened. And so creating has been just it's given me a lot this season. When I'm not creating, body work is really important to me. And so I have different practitioners that I see who help me to move things around in my body. I find that movement is really, really key for me. And so I do that through dance or practicing yoga, just going on a walk on a nice day here in Florida. And then Roshni mentioned adornment earlier. And yes, that is my jam. Like when I need to have a pick me up, I get done up and I go somewhere so I can be seen. And that feels really good when I'm going through all the things.
Thank you, Bree. Priscilla, this is such a good question. I love it. And I think the zine really illuminates, I think, our personal and professional interests. For me personally, my love language is food, like cooking, eating, thinking about it, dreaming about it, just all aspects of it. So for me, like there's this like really charged word of like emotional eating, but I fully embrace that. I think that for me is like what my body's craving, what it's needing. So I'm a big fan of emotionally eating. However you want to think about it, you can think about it, but it is deeply nourishing to me, and I trust that my body knows what it needs, and I will, respect and honor my body's cravings and needs. So cooking, eating, yeah, like clams, pasta, rice, key, being surrounded by flowers, um, and yeah, body work, like in Indian culture, like getting like scalp and head massages, it's just like next level. To me, that's like my religious practice, I feel. So really like tending to your body, because that's where, grief really, I think, comes to the surface for me. So it's really, yeah, like breathing, moving, doing yoga, being in nature. And also, a big part of me for this year has been really unplugging from technology, from even consuming, content or other people's stories. So a lot of energetic boundary, I would say, and just trusting what you're doing is enough, and just try one or two things that resonate with you. I think like what Charlene was saying, there's such like desire to do this so perfectly too, um, I would say really just give yourself grace and trust that, the two things that call to you are probably all you. So thank you for that.
I really love how that ties together with what we contributed to the zine in different ways. Someone in the chat had mentioned about different ways that grief manifests, and also I think of the ways that we process. And I tend to think that I am very much a cognitive processor, like from the head up. I have the checklists, I have the binders and all that. But actually, when I think about actually processing the grief, it's very sensory. It is chai. It's not, not as amazing as Roshni's chai, but it is a hot chai. It is a cashmere sweater. And in putting together the zine, it was interesting because I was like, oh yeah, and there's color. And oh yeah, there was like interpretive dance that like I just kind of spontaneously started doing red ribbon dancing, like as a way to kind of connect with that aspect of my mother. So yeah, it's kind of releasing a bit of the head and dropping into senses. So that's an interesting reflection too, of maybe doing the opposite of what you normally do for coping.
I'll go. I almost kind of felt like for a while there, like I would kind of, it was really easy for me to just kind of like look at my, or think of my grief as like this like third person. So I could like observe it. And I kind of feel like, and I mean Roshni talks about this sometimes, like she frames it as like, what is your grief's craving? And that question really resonates for me, because I really felt like this like like Tita's grief had its own desires, Like basically Tita's grief was like, you know, like I want Tita to go and explore different things, like things that like Tita would like never do, like watercolor. I'm not an artist. Okay. But it was almost like my grief was craving color. It was craving like the energy of joy. And so it pushed me toward exploring, you know, a difficult medium, but like the notion of, yeah, like bringing in like color and joy and that that vibrancy, the frequencies of it. Like that was one thing. So like I've fallen in love with watercolor, which is also something Roshni has helped me do, because she introduced me to this amazing store that sells like incredible watercolor. Roshni, thank you. Anyway, but you know, the other thing is, when my parents, when their health was really declining, and we lived on two different coasts of the country. I mean, I found myself like in a dingy hotel room, like not far from them, and like exhausted from like tending to whatever. And I just remember this so clearly. You know, it was like 4 PM, and I was like, ah. And I turned on the TV, and I don't know, like Judge Judy or something like that came on, and I like plopped myself on like, you know, the too soft bed. And I'm like, and then I was just like, what the hell am I doing? This is gross. and then after that, like I got myself, I was like, I could either spend like the next 6 hours watching Judge Judy, or maybe do something a little bit more productive. So I got myself to a gym, and I like my son was rowing at that time. So I was like, I don't know what that's like. I'm going to try that. And it's like, I would never do that. So again, like my anticipatory grief was like, get on that rower. So I kind of now look at that as like, that's my grief rowing. That's like the way that I get it out of my body. And I know that like, if I hadn't done that, like during all those months, I would actually be a really physically sick person right now. I know it. So it's like that for me. It's like, you know, yeah, like rowing, watercolor, yeah, food, but it's like it's sensory, you know, trying to just explore things in terms of like, what are, yeah, you know, what does this flower smell like, look like? Simple things. So yeah, thank you for the question.
And I can share a little bit about my practices. Deep feeler. So I need a lot of different ways to purge the emotions. So writing has always been a go-to for me. Journaling, just moving my hand. I used to make a lot of art. So this just made me remember a piece I made as like another time I was grieving, which was called 50 pounds. So like I literally was working with like grout, and it's like a 50-pound sculptural like painting that I made. But practically for me, like I need a lot of movement. So whether it's walks outside, yoga, I do a lot of meditation, energy work. But I think a huge part of it has always been purging on the pages, writing, and like speaking to people, you know, if I felt like I could, talking to a friend, talking to a family member, that's always been super helpful for me. Yeah, it's a little bit about that. And we are coming to a close. We have a few minutes. And does anyone have any last questions before we close?
No, I think we're in a good place. You can go to the link that I just shared in the chat.
I have one more question, please.
Sure. Yeah.
So in bringing this to community, as far as flyers, posting it on social media, do you all have any suggestions on what words to use to invite the BIPOCs to come in for a peer supported grief session because I find it very difficult at times to get people to come in. Thank you.
Charlene, were you going to respond?
Yeah, I can't see everyone. So if you raise your hand, please do go ahead and speak up. But my take on it is, in terms of calling people in, my approach is really to get very personal. I describe it as like cracking my own heart open as an invitation for other people to share and to step through. That I think sometimes there can be a temptation, like especially if you're not a therapist or like a licensed medical professional, to talk in very technical terms or professional terms. And I find that the more personal I am when I talk about why this work is important and what helped me, that's what draws people in. So just sharing that.
I would share, Gail, maybe describing why you're offering this, what is like why you're drawn to this practice, how it benefited you. I think, again, like Charlene said, speaking about your own personal journey. And I think you can always set an expectation of what one may experience and what it would feel like. So I think, presenting that directly to your audience too is, come join in this like deep sensory bath where, you can access these spaces of like comfort or curiosity, whatever you want to cultivate. I think I would paint a picture where it just feels really enticing, about the experience of it, not necessarily the healing aspects of it. That's up to the person and how they experience it. So I would just get curious on like how you would describe your experience, why you're drawn to it, why should someone else join you on it. So as descriptive as you can be, using pictures, even the sound you're creating. I think when you were describing it, I just felt like, ooh, like I'm trying to imagine like what that sounds like, the resonance of that. I think that would be really beautiful too.
Charlene and Roshni both said similar things that I was going to mention, but to say it in a different way, I think relationships are so important, and I think it's really key to building trust within community, especially when we come from specific lineages and heritages. It's important to build trust with one another. And I know for curating spaces for Black folks, like we want to know who's going to be there, like who's going to be there, what can I expect? And so like Roshni was saying, like, yeah, get descriptive and really paint the picture for folks. And I think it also just takes time for that to unfold. I'm in a similar place as well, so.
I relate to a lot of what's been shared, and just to add that being authentic and honest and true, people feel that, and those are the people that are going to show up, but those are going to be the people that relate, and takes time. And it's just one thing I wanted to share. All right, y'all, we're a little
Thank you.
over. Thank you. Charlene, do you want to share the zine?
Yeah, I'm just going to put the link for the zine for Grief at the Table there today. And you'll find in there recipe from Roshni, artwork from several of us, poetry from Bree, lots of words, heartfelt advice. And I do think everyone has cracked their heart open on the pages of the zine. both as part of our own expression for how we feel during holidays, New Year, Lunar New Year, all the different times that people gather and we most miss the people who aren't there. So we've done that hopefully as support and in service of other people of color who might need to hear from other people who know what they're experiencing. So please do check it out and go and find us, connect with us. And thank you so much for joining us here today.